Ayan, good evening to everyone. So yun, to the millions and millions of of our subscribers ng Photography Chismis sa YouTube at Spotify. So tonight medyo iba yung natin, medyo iba yung format natin. Usually we do this as a kwentuhan session, pero for tonight medyo lecture tayo. Kasi I think it's also going to be more fruitful and more productive if we do this specific session as a lecture. Huwag kayong magtaka kung mag-isa lang ako tonight. For tonight, we're going to talk about photography as not art, introduction to semiotics. Okay? So medyo run through lang muna tayo. So why are we here? So many groups and instructors of photography claim that photography is art. Diba? But what does that really mean? It seems that the liberal use of the term has led to a multitude of interpretations of what photography is and what art is. While the plurality of understanding is rarely seen as a bad thing, it does create some challenges in the discourse of what is Philippine photography. We try to provide a way of reading a photograph outside the conventions and presuppositions brought out by attaching the word art in the discussion of the medium. So, thank you for joining us tonight for episode 4 of the Marites series, Kwentuhan Session on Philippine Photography, entitled Photography as Not Art, Introduction to Semiotics. Okay, so kung naliligaw kayo, this is Photography Chismis PH. And some reminders and notices. Okay, so this is a recorded Zoom session. So you will be prompted by Zoom for your consent in the recording of this material. Next, the recording shall be uploaded in Photography Chismis PH and its various platforms, such as, but is not limited to, Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify for educational purposes. Okay, number 3, this episode of the Kwentuhan Session shall not be monetized. Derived knowledge from this program should be cited accordingly based on the conventions and laws on intellectual property in the Philippines as applicable. Then lastly, this Kwentuhan Session is an informal discussion and is not a lecture, but technically this is going to be a lecture kasi wala akong kakwentuhan today, kayo lang. So, comments and questions shall be recognized accordingly by the host or moderator as applicable. So, yun. Okay. So, konting plugging, no? So, Photography Chismis, as mentioned before, so we're in Spotify. So, kung kayo nag-drive at wala kayong makausap, pwede nyo akong pakinggan sa Spotify. Pero, since tonight is going to be a lecture, so medyo visual siya. Actually, dati may nagtanong din sa akin na parang paano ka nagkaroon ng podcast about photography? Di ba ang photography visuals? So yun. So, in a way, I'm addressing that kasi specifically for the lecture type of talks or the lecture episodes like for this one. So it's sort of a lecture because it's just going to be me and I'm going to show a lot of slides. So medyo kailangan siguro mas maganda na you watch this through YouTube. So we have a dedicated channel for Photography Chismis PH. So I hate to say it pero hit that subscribe button, like and follow. So yun, so Photography Chismis PH in YouTube as well. Okay. Yan, ito yung ito feeling ko marami na-trigger ng mga curious nito. So hindi sila nag-join sa tonight pero I'm sure panonoorin nila tong video na to. So yung mga na-trigger dito sa topic na to, relax lang hindi tayo nang away. Pero yun nga, siguro what prompted me to do this episode specifically, to be honest, in my 17 or 18 years in the photography field, parang I noticed that there is a certain liberty to how we use the term art. It was mentioned in our intro text, diba? In our intro spiel. So is it bad that people are associating photography and art? Not necessarily, obviously. So I personally believe that photography is art. So siguro para lang to placate or siguro to clarify dun sa mga viewers o na nakita yung title, parang siguro isa sa mga impressions is that siguro clickbait tong ginagawa ni Tony kasi I mean he is from Canon before and then he used to be in Silverlens which is an art gallery. And he's a photographer and he's also doing art. So is this a clickbait? Again, to clarify, so hindi natin goal mang-away. And number two, this is not clickbait. So I really want to point out something about this discussion. And siguro number three is yun. Siguro one of the recent responsibilities that I've took on as an advocacy is to teach photography. So in a way, how do I say this? Parang ano, hindi naman burden, pero there is a responsibility for me to substantiate things that I say. So siguro if you're a content creator or you're an instructor, you're a teacher, you're a photographer, you're a practicing photographer, probably when you say photography is art, I'm sure you mean something. You mean something when you use art in describing photography, when you associate those two words. So I'm sure there's a perspective where you're coming from. So regardless if it has been how you were taught previously as a hobbyist or even a professional, or probably it's an advocacy of yours, or maybe it's a something that you've chosen to do art using photography, diba? So madaming reasons that you might associate photography and art, those two words. Currently I'm teaching in college, and when we use the term art, there is always a need to contextualize. When one refers to photography as art, what does that mean? What does that mean? So, as an educator, well, I don't masyado naman feeling yung term ng educator, no? Pero we don't throw terminologies around. So, yun. So, as a teacher, we are compelled, well, I am compelled that when I use a term, as much as possible, I make it specific and I use it in proper context. So, yun. So one of the things that I've noticed is that yun nga, the term art is being used by teachers to refer to photography very liberally, even curators. So, and while that is not wrong, obviously they have a point by using the term art in association with photography. My concern lang would be if you use art in the same sentence as photography, what do you mean? I'm sure as a practitioner, you mean something, diba? So, siguro for tonight, what I'm trying to clarify is that um, when I say photography as not art, then I mean something. So yun, siguro, so ang haba ng intro, no? So yun. So ano pa lang yan, first line pa lang. Kasi nga, loaded kasi yun. So, siguro, if any one of you, well, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, or if you're watching this YouTube video, probably you already have some conceptions or preconceptions of what photography is and what art is. So does that mean that I'm saying no? Or am I contradicting what you're saying? No, not necessarily. What I'm just saying is that I'm coming from the perspective of a teacher and I am compelled to clarify terms. So yun, siguro yun yung siguro to summarize na I'm doing this episode because I am compelled by my responsibility and my role as a teacher to be specific when I use terms, and also to provide context in cases that probably the same word or the same term could mean differently to add different teachers. So yun, so I have to provide context. So yun. So okay, haba ng intro ko. Anyway, so yun. So yan, sige. So yan. So let's since I want to put things into context, maybe let's use some of our friends from the field, from the community, and let's see how they describe photography and in relation to art. Yan, sige. So let's start with Nico. So Nico is a friend, although Sony user siya. So he recently posted, I think that's last night. So last night, so our friend Nico Valenzuela, who's a landscape photographer, architectural photographer, posted something in his channel, and it was specifically tackling composition. So as you can see in the slide, no. So, and I think we also have to make it clear that I think one of the target audiences of Nico are beginners to siguro mid-level photographers. And therefore that contextualizes yung ano niya, yung ginagamit niya na line, which is simplehan lang natin. So yun, and also it's in Filipino. So let's assume na one of the reasons why Nico is doing that is that he's making photography accessible. So through language and also through the entire content itself, that it doesn't have to be convoluted or hindi siya complicated. Okay. If we take yung recent content niya kagabi, he was specifically talking about composition. And there is a line there when you reach the yung fourth quarter ng video niya. He said something. So that's why I'm using this as an example. So ang sinabi niya, kapag ang mga bagay sa retrato mo ay naiayos mo ng may balanse, may direksyon, at walang distractions, ang ganda ng retrato mo. Kahit ano pa ang camera mo. After nun, sabi niya, ang composition mo, doon papasok kung maganda ang isang retrato. Doon papasok ang art sa photography. So how do we contextualize this, no? I think Nico is targeting beginner photographers. So kaya nga sinasabi niya na simplehan lang natin, wag natin masyadong komplikahin. And then maliban pa doon, so it's in Filipino. So and specifically ang topic niya is composition. So if we're going to read this context of what Nico is saying, is that he's saying that when you arrange items or elements in a frame using devices, so kaya nga composition. So we're specifically using compositional devices kasi aside from compositional devices, there are other devices in photography aside from composition. So I think siguro in future episodes, no, he'll talk about it. So and aside from that, there are elements, there are principles, and there are devices of composition. So yun yung medyo mas mid-level discussion of composition. So you have elements of composition, you have principles of composition. I think he mentioned some. So you have your balance, symmetry, sabihin natin, ano yun? Visual weight. So yun. So, and then actually ang in other fields it's called design principles, diba? So design principles. And then lastly, so yun. So he also mentioned one of the more popular devices in photography is the rule of thirds, 'di ba? So ano pa ba yung ibang example ng compositional devices? So frame within a frame, 'di ba? Or foreground, middle ground, background relationships. Yan yung mga basic devices. So yun, so elements of composition, principles of composition, and devices of composition or compositional devices. So again, let's assume that Nico is using is contextualizing his discussion of art to the most basic level na beginner photographer ka, you want to be artistic, then I'll teach you composition. So yun. So so yun yung sobrang basic. So kaya sinabi niya doon papasok ang art sa photography since we usually associate beauty and aesthetically pleasing to what is art. So yun. So yun, no? Kaya simple yung explanation niya. Okay, next. So let's take an example naman from Sir Vic. So Sir Vic yan, salamat kay Sir Vic dahil kung di dahil kay Sir Vic, di ako makapag-talk sa Photo World Asia. So I owe him a lot. So yan, so si Sir Vic naman, nag-post din siya. So just 2 days ago, ang framing naman niya is the art, parang framing niya dun sa post niya is the artist side of me. I am a paintographer. Actually, hindi ko alam how to read this kasi medyo parang in a way, parang parang nga nangyayari, how I see it. So si Sir Vic, parang in a way, parang sinasabi niya na for you to be an artist, you have to know painting. So Sir Vic, kung mapanood mo man to, so meron tayong specific na segment sa photography chismis kwentuhan sessions, yung counterpoints. So I can invite you for counterpoints and then you can also share your ideas about yung itong specific post na to. So yun yung facility ng photography chismis wherein kung merong mga tao na makapanood ng existing content and they have something to say, either a comment, an expansion, or sabi natin, siguro dissenting opinion, then since we're promoting this course, then we will give you the floor. We will dedicate an entire episode to hear your opinion. So if I misrepresent yung mga interpretations ko. So this also goes for Nico, no? So Nico, if you get to watch this and then you think that I might have misrepresented your content and specifically that episode, then let's have an episode so that I'll give you around 5 to 10 minutes na uninterrupted uh discussion on what actually yung response mo dito sa content na to. And then let's have a kwentuhan after. So there is a specific content format for that. So it's called counterpoint. So we are encouraging discourse. So anyway, going back to Sir Vic. Ito naman kay Sir Vic, actually medyo confused ako in the sense that I know Sir Vic, he does photography. He teaches photography. He does photography as art. And when I see his work, I I I do not I don't doubt that artistic or artful or art. Yan. Actually, yun yung mga terminologies na ginagamit natin. Kadalasan we use artistic, artful, 'di ba? So parang in a way, parang minsan takot tayong gamitin specifically yung word na art. Kaya minsan gamitin natin yung term na artistic or artful, 'di ba? So because parang sinasabi natin na gusto ko ma-achieve yung art as an end. Pero since wala tayo doon tayo sa artful. So like, parang sinasabi mo, like art or similar to art. But that line specifically means na this is not necessarily art. What you're trying to do is something artful or something artistic, and that's different. So kaya curious nga ako na how other teachers and how other practitioners want to substantiate that idea of art and photography, that connection. So I hope I can hear your opinions as well. So going back to Sir Vic. So, curious ako dito sa post niya kasi parang the artist side of me, I am a paintographer. So, in a way, this post points to a certain identity that Sir Vic wants to construct or wants to expose to the world or construct, or in a way, parang ito yung way na Sir Vic wants us to see him. So, as a painter, kaya nga paintographer, and then a photographer. So, ang curious lang ako doon is he making a distinction between art and it being related to painting, and then photography as not being art, and therefore kailangan magkaroon ng connection yung painting and photography. So, I'm saying that not to instigate Sir Vic. So Sir Vic, if you hear this, again, I'm not trying to instigate anything, no. So we're just trying to contextualize as an outsider, as an observer, photography chismis as an observer, we also want to understand how other teachers, how other practitioners are contextualizing the word art. So in a way, parang dito ang nakukuha ko is that Sir Vic wants to have that association, that artistic association with this identity na I am an artist and I do painting, but I'm also doing photography. So curious ako na, for example, pag tinanggal natin yung painting, will cervic still be able to say that I am an artist? Bakit kailangan paintographer at hindi lang photographer? Or, ang point lang ni cervic is that I can do both. Possible kasi na ganun, diba? Siguro to relate this to history, during the development of photography in the West, one of the stronger movements that came about in the development of photography in the early days is that the pictorialist movement. So the pictorialist movement, what they thought of is that for photography to be consumed or to be legitimized, for photography to be legitimized as an art, the pictorialists thought that it should look like a painting. So yun yung one reading. Some more contemporary readings, meaning yung mga mas recent readings of the pictorialist movement, what they're saying is that not necessarily they want to be painterly or magmukhang painting. What they're trying to say is that they are applying the rules, principles, devices that has been practiced in painting and putting that in photography for photography to have an output that is aesthetically pleasing. Diba? So in a way, parang it's not necessarily to legitimize photography in relation to painting, but in a way, we're using the devices that has been developed in painting to photography to come out to have an output that is artistic, diba? So yun na. So yun yung kina-clarify natin. So again, so to clarify. So the early development of photography in the West, meron kasi in development din kasi of photography in the East, which is the ethnographic photograph. So yun din, you have to, so for our viewers, no, so you have to also have to consider that when photography developed, while the West was developing photography as an art, when you go to the East, photography, which was brought by the colonizers, are being used for ethnography. It's not being used for art. They were documenting the tribes, the locals, the indigenous people. Kaya nga, if 1839 na develop yung daguerreotype, in 1841, nasa Pilipinas na siya. And when it came to the Philippines, they weren't doing art. They were documenting things. They were documenting the Philippines, Singapore, Macau, diba? And maliban pa doon, it was used as a tool by colonizers in relation to power. So power in terms of depiction, power in relation to the ruling party. So if they want to make a relationship with the king, for example, Thailand, for example, they introduce photography as a way of getting favors. So yun. So in a way, parang how photography developed in the West and in the East are very different. Diba? So yung pictorialist movement, which we usually teach students as a movement of photography, that is a Western movement. However, at the same time that the pictorialist movement was happening in the West, in France, in Spain, in Germany, photography in the East, which was brought by the French. For example, yung Lagren mission, diba? One of the more substantiated ways in the documentation of the arrival of photography in the Philippines, I mean in Asia, is that it was brought by Jules Etier. He was a customs inspector in a French mission to Southeast Asia, so Singapore and then Philippines, and then they went around Southeast Asia. But the purpose was for documenting the different territories. So it's partly political, it was partly ethnographic, and it was partly commercial. So why would they go here in the first place? Because they wanted to document the price jewels of the Southeast Asian colonies. So if you also listen to other academics, So one of the reasons that the French went to the Philippines during the Spanish times here in the Philippines because they wanted to photograph yung colony ng Spain. Gusto nilang pag-aralan, gusto nilang i-document, diba? So it was about commerce and not necessarily about art. Yun. Kaya nga, ang dami, parang isang slide pa lang yun. So anyway, so going back to Cervic. So yun yung yun yung, medyo confused ako in a way. Confused ako in the sense that, should I take this as a presentation of an identity wherein one becomes an artist if and only if you know painting, and then from that knowledge in painting, you apply those rules, devices, principles to photography, and then photography becomes an art by virtue of that transfer? Or are we saying that it just happens that both are art? So painting is art, photography and art, and it just happened that Cervic can do both. So yun yung possible na readings nitong post ni Cervic. So yun. So Cervic, kung meron kang concern, you can just message me. We can have an episode for you. So let's discuss this also as an expansion, diba? Okay, so next naman. Okay, to specific kay FPPF, diba? So, okay. So I'll introduce another term. Okay. Sige, how do I put this? Kasi hindi ko alam kung how it's going to be taken by by the community. So one of the less used terms in the community is salon photography. So ilan lang yung gumagamit niyan. So in the academy, we use the term salon photography. And siguro yung medyo mas advanced na advanced teachers at saka advanced na hobbyist, they would have probably encountered the term salon photography. So what does it mean? What is salon photography? So the term salon has a long history in the West in relation to art. So before, they had art salons. And art salons siguro would be the predecessors of art clubs. Yun, siguro yun yung pinakamadali. So again, mahaba yun. Malaman yung discussion of the salon, the salon system or the salon movement in relation to art. Pero just siguro to simplify, since this is not an art class, this is a photography, this is a photography lecture. So that term salon photography has a long tradition when it comes to art. Kasi dati ang mga painters similarly, meron silang art club. So the way you get your work exposed is that if you go to a salon or you join a salon. So yun na. And in a way also, there are different levels or themes in salon art. So some of them would be myths, some would be historical, some would be daily life or slice of life. Sa painting yun, sa painting yun. So siguro I'm not sure if I can cover it because that's art history na yun. That's so siguro kung gusto niyo kakwentuhan, wait, let me know. I mean, we can do a specific episode on that, but that's painting. Let's see. Pero anyway, so yun. So yun. So what's the relation of the salon tradition of art? And usually it's visual art, and visual art is usually painting. So what is the relation of salon art practice or the salon tradition to photography in the Philippines? Since we're discussing Philippines, so as kadalasan when I discuss, I always bring it back to the Philippines or at least Southeast Asia. So I mean, lagi na lang west. So let's talk about the Philippines because this is Philippine photography. Let's have a discussion on Philippine photography. Okay, dami ko sinabi. Anyway, yung point ko is in relation to Philippine photography, historically, photography was practiced in the Philippines in camera clubs. So aside from the ethnographic uses of photography, which was one of the main traditions or the long traditions of photographic practice in the Philippines to document people, the salon type of photography is somehow parang yan yung artistic version naman. Kaya in a way, in terms of the long-standing traditions of photographic practice in the Philippines, in a way, dalawa yung major. So hindi lang hindi lang dalawa, pero dalawa yung major. One is photography being used to document things. So to document people in an ethnographic way, to document topologies, or for example, topology meaning yung ano yung ano yung the curvature and the features, the physical features of land systems and water systems. So yun yung topological uses. It's also being used. It also was used to document structures, and also there was a tradition of photography being used to document events. So and there's also the cart visit, diba? So yung parang postcards. So basically photography as postcards. That's also documentary, pero in a way parang vernacular slash artistic siya kasi kaya nga lagi siyang embedded yung art at saka documentation. But another long tradition of photography in the Philippines is the salon photography, or quote unquote the artistic practice. So yun. So we're not saying that those are two totally different things, but we're saying that there is a distinction. So distinctions and categories specifically for photography are very porous. Pag sinabi natin very porous is that we can find a delineation. However, that delineation is very porous na may mga examples ng documentary photography that you can say are artistic, and there are artistic photographs that you can say are documentary in feature and in nature, which is, for example, street photography. Street photography are usually associated with the aesthetics, meaning the form is the content. So the viewing is the experience. However, by virtue of you documenting the streets, you can also consider it as documentary, that in that documentary tradition, diba? So anyway, so going back to salon photography. Salon photography has a long-standing association with art and photography because the camera clubs. Yan. So yun. So sa camera clubs, laging parang hindi man lagi pero the way how photography is being taught is that there is a certain formula. Yan. Siguro yun yung ito yung distinctive sa salon photography na merong formula on how to shoot an image. So for example, even landscape, how do you shoot a landscape? Diba? Lahat ng landscape photographers sa Philippines, in a way, or sabihin natin largely, they are influenced by the salon tradition wherein, diba? Oh, sige, I mean, I don't know. Let's not get into that kasi mahaba yung discussion specific to that genre. But nevertheless, karamihan or a large part of how we look or how we see photographs were influenced by the aesthetics or the formula that was taught in camera clubs, in salons before. So I think if you want if you want someone who really can talk about salon photography, I recommend talking to Mr. Roderick Javier, so Sir J. So that's and I think that's part of his masters and also a research project that he did for Proto Martyr. So yun. So Proto Martyr, Proto Educator. So and he also had an exhibit in the Vargas Museum in relation to the salon tradition of photography. And the great thing with salon photography as a tradition, one of the critical features of salon photography is that art is also associated largely with the technology. So you talk about cameras. Kaya mapapansin natin na in FPPF, a huge part of the training or a huge part of the explanation of what is photography is in relation to the camera, the tools that we use on how to make images. So for example, a basic photography when you go to FPPF is aperture, shutter, 'di ba? ISO, 'di ba? Yan ang basic, pero there is actually a way of teaching basic photography that you don't start with the camera. I mean, for example, for me, I don't teach basic photography using a camera. I teach basic photography using phenomenology. And sabihin niyo parang masyado na advanced. No, it's super simple. So it's super simple yung idea of photography as phenomenology. Pero nevertheless, kaya yun yung sinasabi lang natin na teaching basic photography using cameras as a starting point is not the only way. There are other ways of teaching basic photography even without a camera. So yun. So anyway, so that great tradition of teaching basic photography or teaching photography in general using a camera and in relation to teaching the camera how to compose using the camera are formulas that were built through the salon photography tradition, and you would see a strong tradition of that present in FPF. So you will also see and in a way, because of that common understanding, they are able to come to be an organized group of people teaching the same things. So yun. So in a way, when you go to FPPF, the teachers would teach photography the same way or very similarly. Hindi naman siguro, let's say, magkakaiba naman sila ng styles. Pero in a way, very similar yung lingwahe nila, the way they teach, yung motivations nila, tendencies nila. Pero when you go to, for example, to Binil, iba yung way din namin magturo. Kasi we're not using salon photography. So yun. So anyway, so yun. So in a way, so bakit ko haba ng explanation? Pero bakit ako napunta doon? Kasi when they frame photography as art, mapapansin niyo in the slide is that they use the term artistic. Actually, hindi ko nga mahanap yung parang naalala ko dati, may mayroong post na FPPF teaches the art of photography. Hindi ko lang mahanap kung sino yung nag-post na yun or I don't know. Pero nevertheless, let's say hindi specifically ginamit yung art. We go back to the question of the term artistic. So when you say artistic, what does artistic mean? Diba? What does artistic mean? So in a way, parang lumalabas na it is trying to be art, but it is not. Kaya we're using the term artistic. And then aside from that, ang mga family of terms that we can use in that discussion is artful or like art, parang art, feeling art, wag naman masyado naman yung feeling art. Pero yun yung relationship niya, the way it's framed using and using two materials of FPPF. So for FPF sila Mrs. Wang, if there's some clarification, then let me know, because in a way that's how I see it as an observer, no. So we've been partners since ang tagal natin naging partners since 2008 or 2007 when I joined Canon. We've been partners. So again, this is not trying to trigger or being negative. I'm just saying that the terminologies that we're using, for me, as an observer, I get I can get an idea of how art is being depicted. However, because it's artistic, I don't necessarily understand, or it's not very clear to me what artistic means. In the sense that art in itself, the term art, is very difficult to substantiate na unless we go through the entire history of art, art, yung pag it's very hard to substantiate unless we try to study art history and also art criticism. So that's two different things. So art criticism is also an entire separate field of study. So you can have a PhD in art history and art criticism. Those are two different things. Pero nevertheless, so mahirap na nga substantiate yung art, yung term na art, tapos dinagdagan pa natin ng artistic. So, ano yung artistic? So, it doesn't answer what art is. And now, we're also implying that we are trying to be art, but it is not, or it is near art. So, yun yung siguro yung difficulty of these terms. But, to be fair, I've been in the community naman for 20 years. So I have an idea what it means. I have an idea. But then again, I need to ask that question because I am a teacher. So in a way, if a student asks me what is art and what is art in relation to photography, we have to substantiate that. To my fellow teachers, diba? So pag sinabi natin beautiful, Ibig sabihin niya, salon photography yung pinag-uusapan natin. Diba? So, okay. Okay, ito naman si AG. Ito yung mga isa sa mga ano sa mga takbuhan ko talaga pag ano, kakaiba mag-isip. So, the good thing about EG is that aside from being a practitioner, he's also a critic. He's also a writer, no? So, the good thing with EG, he always has an insight. So, yun na lang. So, whether I agree with it or not, for now, it doesn't matter. So, I personally like EG because he always has an insight. So, yun. So, kaya nga siya yung gines ko nung first episode kasi I knew he would be able to say something. So yun. So isa sa mga post ni AG is that so art is not always about pretty things. It's about who we are, what happened to us, and how our lives are affected. So I'm using AG as an example, pero this is not a quote from him. So this is a repost, and specifically he's referring to Angkor Photo Festival. So why am I using this? So number one is that um, the most important part here is that art is being depicted as a process. Diba? So it's not just the appearance. So if we rephrase yung keynote ni AG na author, is that art is not an appearance, it is a process. So yun So maganda yung example kasi ni AG, yung ni-repost niya. Kasi it provides us a view of art na outside salon photography. Yan. So kaya okay si AG kasi here he's saying that art is not just the appearance, it's not just the output, it's the process. Diba? So ano yan yung mga thinking of yan yung critical thinking talaga na yan yung thinking like a critic. I mean, yun. So pero another aspect of this post is that he's relating it to Angkor Photo Festival. So why is that important? So in a way, what he's saying is that aside from this specific author that he's quoting, he's also saying that Angkor Photo Festival as a workshop or an educational uh, process, the way they frame photography is that photography is art, but we are specifically highlighting the aspect of the process. So what EG is saying, EG, if you get to watch this, so yun, so let me know if I misrepresented yung idea mo. Pero the critical idea of what EG is saying is that Angkor Photo Festival as a workshop organization or a festival organization highlights not just the appearance. So highlighting not just the output of photography, but the process of photography, the process of photographing things or photographing concepts, photographing the world, photographing feelings, emotions. So in a way, it provides us it gives us an insight of photography that is beyond the appearance, which is how we usually, I mean, a lot of teachers would focus on the aesthetics, diba? So the aesthetics is basically a certain feature on an image, not necessarily the appearance nila. I mean, to be fair. So when we say aesthetics, it's a value judgment of what is beautiful. Yun yung classical. But you also, if you want to go more contemporary on aesthetics, is that aesthetics also includes the process. It includes the concept. It even includes the accidents that happen in the process. So yun. So yun yung it also ayun pala. And it also takes into consideration context. Yun. So, isa pang important part is the context. So in a way parang maraming implications tong pinost ni EG. But in a way siguro to make it simple, simplihan lang natin, sabi ni Nico. Simplihan lang muna natin na parang one of the critical ideas of AG and the post of the repost that he and in the post that he reposted is that photography as art, it is not just the image. There is something more to it. And specifically in relation to this, it's the process. So syempre, I'm sure AG has a lot of things to say pa, no? Pero lang, siguro to simplify lang, siguro yun muna. I'm sure AG, pag naparoon mo to, dami mo masasabi. Pero yun muna. Okay, next. Ayan. So aside from educators, there is also the side of curators. So ito specifically, Steph, is in the art field. Okay. So pag sinabi ting art field, specifically painting, sculpture, performance, digital art. I'm not sure if she's also covering music, um, in installations, visual arts. So yun. So if when in this context, when we say art, it's specifically visual arts. So yun. So and also gallery arts. So yun, siguro yun yung pwede nating sabihin, no? So again, that's most of my statements here are a bit reductive. So I'm sure dami yung i-comment, pero nevertheless, since I'm just highlighting a certain thing about your ideas, so so please so I hope you understand, no? So specifically, what I chose to highlight here is that her belief that image making is art. So so Steph and I has had a lot of a lot of conversations. Minsan inaabot kami ng 5 hours just talking about this, no? So anyway, so yun. So and in a way parang we're not saying yes or no to each other. Then in a way parang we're saying that this is my perspective, this is your perspective. So yun. So in a way merong areas na we don't agree, pero a lot of it we agree, 'di ba? So anyway, so going back, so ano ba yung critical dun sa mga sa conversation namin ni Steph? She's saying that basically image making is art. It's that simple. Let's not make it complicated. Simplihan nga natin, sabi nga ni Nico. Anything that any process of image making is art. So in a way, constitutive of this image making process is number one, the image itself, which is the output. But also secondary, inclusive of this is what AJ also mentioned, that there is a process, kaya nga making the image, which is the output, but there's also the making, which is the process. So in a way, this is a bit more inclusive. So so for her first step, what she's saying is that image making is art. Pero in the process of being inclusive, she also mentioned art is something only a human can do. So actually dito meron akong contentions, no. Pero nevertheless, so that's what that's one of the highlights of most of our conversations, sasabi ni Steph, that only human beings can do art. Okay? So yun yung isa sa mga critical. Ako, I would disagree, but so since we're talking about Steph, so we'll highlight Steph muna. Tapos maliban pa doon, a cave painting is art. So in a way, parang the great thing with what Steph is saying is that let's not limit our conceptions of art to what is legitimized, or at least what is accepted in the gallery system. So she also uses the term canon of art in most of our conversation. She's saying that a lot of art has not been included in the canons of art. So that statement specifically points to something that is most people don't notice, that art, most of what we think is art that was accepted by a system. It is art that was accepted as legitimate, or was labeled legitimate. By who? By a system. So kaya yung insight nito nung kay Steph is that what she's saying is that there is a certain legitimizing body. There is a legitimizing body that says or authoritatively labels something as art. And these are usually the galleries, the curators, which is Steph is a curator. She's also an artist. And academicians, critics. So ito yung gallery system, diba? Pero what she's saying is that she's recognizing that, but she's also recognizing that there are a lot of things that is art, a lot of art is present in the world in human history that were not included in that system, in that structure. So ano yung example niya? Historically, a cave painting is art. So that's what Steph usually gives us as an example also, that art is something that is embedded in our psyche. We make images. And the act of image making, kaya nga sabi natin image making is may word the image, which is the output, and the making is the process. So sa perspective ni Steph, a cave painting, regardless if it's very crude, well, quote-unquote crude, kasi nga kung ikaw naman ang gumawa niya nung panahon ng caveman, I mean, that is high art na, diba? So, I mean, separate usapan naman yung high art, folk art, fine art, medyo iba na, mahabang story itong yung usapan ng art na yun. Anyway, so yun. So, pero ang ina-highlight ko lang is the inclusivity of what Steph is saying. That is that even cave paintings is art. So, it's inclusive because it points to a certain embedded tendency of humanity to make symbols. Image, I mean, there's a lot of kinds of symbols, pero specifically image as symbols. So yun. So, and in this case, sabi niya nga, I mean, in our conversation, sabi niya na cave painting. Ang sa akin nga, sabi ko cave drawing. Sa kanya, hindi, cave painting. Okay, sige, painting. So she's saying that a cave painting is art. Okay. And then meron pa siyang ini-include since mas inclusive yung perspective ni Steph. Ang isa sa highlight niya, a circle made by a kid is art. Ako, dami ko rin contentions doon. Pero again, if we're trying to be inclusive, if we're going to view it through the perspective of Steph, I would agree. But if I try to be, if I try to position myself as an observer, I would say that we have to break down that idea of a circle made by a kid being art. So number one is, in the first place, the term art is a construct. Well, this is advanced studies na. So the term art is a construct by the West. I mean, when you go to the East, if the word art was not introduced to us, we have a different conceptions of what is beautiful, what is divine. It's different. So in a way, parang art, if you go to the bottom of it, if you want to be, if you do art criticism, it's actually a construct. Someone thought about a group of people thought about a concept and then they say this is art. So yun. So yun yung medyo advanced studies na. Pero nevertheless, so yun yung, if we break that line, a circle made by a kid is art. There's a lot of components there. So yung art in itself, yung the how it's defined or essential, the essence of art is actually, it's just constructed. There is no art. There's no essence of art. Pero anyway, habang usapan, but it's a separate discussion. Then maliban pa doon, a circle. A circle is a figurative demonstration of a concept and also a physical, so a physical demonstration, a physical visual demonstration of a concept in the head. So in a way, there's a performative aspect to it, which is basically physical, but there's also visual, which is the way we absorb it or we see it. So that's the visual phenomenon. Pero the made by a kid, if we go back to the idea of art as being inclusive, it's just around medyo contemporary, nasa around 1950s lang naman nauso yung conception of art as something more broad. Dati, when you talk about art, if you go, for example, even Greece, may specific silang conception of art, which is mimesis. So yung mimesis, basically, art, the goal of art was to represent and mimic and copy nature. So, kaya nga kadalasan, the topic nila is physiology, diba? So, and forms. Pero wala sila masyadong symbolic art. Bibihira. So, okay. Yung symbolic art na naman, maraming contentions yun. Pero nevertheless yun. So, yung an expression of a kid through a shape in a way, that accommodation only happened 1950s. So it's not necessarily an essence of art, but a modern framing of art. Na if you were a kid in the 1500s, sabihin natin wag 1500 kasi meron ng ano nun, may medyo nagde-develop na yung konsepto ng art nun eh. Siguro siguro Greek nga lang, sa Greek na lang. Na parang a kid who draws a circle on the ground, you would have a very hard time getting people to say that that's art if you lived at that time. So in a way, absolute conceptions of art, it does not exist. It's always fluid. So built into the idea of art is the fluidity of it. And therefore, all discussions of what is the essence of art will always be dependent on a framing. So yeah, so it's going to be difficult. Well, anyway, going back. So yeah, so the good thing with how STEP is trying to define art is that it's inclusive. But ang pinaka-concern ko dito right from the start when we're having a conversation is that it's visual arts. One of the reasons why music and dance were not necessarily considered as art for a very long time. I think na-open lang yung performance art, I mean quote unquote performance art, as fine art, was in the 1950s, 40s. Because prior to that, it was visual arts. Art was visual arts. I mean, siguro kung if you go to the yung Beaux Arts, pati yung punta sa French, no? Sa French Academy, iba rin yung terminology nila. Anyway, so yun. I mean, it's a separate conversation. Wait na ako. Anyway, so yun. So, anyways, to conclude, yung kay Steph, medyo mas inclusive, no? So, yun yung point nun. Kaya, photography, given this inclusivity, obviously, photography is art. Eh, yung nga yung drawing ng bata, art na, photography pa, di ba? So, yun yung implications of this statement. Okay, next. In Photomoto, which the creator of that was Steph. So this is a documentation of that round table discussion of different people from different backgrounds and different circles of influence. And we were asked things about photography, and we gave our perspective on an issue given our backgrounds. So yun yung nature nitong discussion na to. So maganda siya kasi for example, Din Araneta, she's one of the founders of Art Fair PH. Si Lisa, so Lisa David, she's a photojournalist. She's 25, so even the age, no, so may variations of age. And then aside from that, she's part of last year 2022's top 100 photos sa Time magazine. So big time, diba? Tapos yeah, may big time, the joke lang. So I'm a teacher, diba? So and then I also have the perspective of corporate, the marketplace, the photography as a marketplace. And then you have several people here. For example, Paco is publishing and advertising and art. And then you have two guys from galleries. And then you have photojournalism, which is easy. And then you have the curator, which is Steph, who is also an artist. I'm going to take this out of context, no? So we were laughing about something. Pero again, a photograph taken out of context is still a photograph. So if I'm going to read it in a way in relation to this presentation, this reminds me of yung sinulat ni Plato, yung the Meno. They were having a discussion about a topic. And in a way, sobrang nag-discuss sila, lahat sila matatalino, lahat sila philosophers. But they cannot agree on the essence of what they were discussing. And in a way, for me, that is a bit poetic because in Photomoto, when we had that roundtable discussion, we were all talking about photography. But given our different backgrounds and our different perspectives, We cannot arrive on a single definition of what photography is. On a on one perspective. I mean, we had different perspective, obviously. So having seven or having eight perspectives, if you're going to look at it in the traditional sense, even if you have eight perspectives, photography is photography. If you're an essentialist, meaning there is an essence to photography that regardless of your perspective, of your background, of your training, you would still see photography as one thing, to see that one essence. However, when we were discussing, we cannot arrive at a single we cannot arrive in a single essence of what photography is. And this photo, in a way, it's a bit poetic because we knew a lot about photography. Every one of us, that eight people in that roundtable discussion, but we cannot arrive in a single definition, and we just laugh. And that's why this photo is a bit poetic. So parang we were like ng time ni Plato na we were laughing because we had tons of things to say, and yet we cannot agree on one single point, on a single essence or a single definition of what photography is. So we just laugh. And that also highlights one thing that sometimes I don't see in Philippine photography, wherein photographers are territorial, built into the psyche of Filipino photographers, is that ako specialist dito sa field na to eh. So if you criticize me about this specific field, magagalit ako kasi who are you to comment on my work when in fact I am I'm an expert, I'm a master photographer in this field. Sa ibang countries hindi ganoon, or sasabihin ng fields na lang, sa art hindi ganoon. Kahit ng specialist pwede siyang questionin. Sa filmmaking, kahit na specialist director siya, well, kasi technically sa film kasi it's collective eh. Hindi naman siya sa cinema, walang one single person who determines the final outcome of a film. Even the director. It's a collaborative effort. Sa photography, one photographer, one image. Di ba? So in a way, in the Philippines, specifically in the Philippines, ang mga photographers territorial na parang, alam mo, Tony, yung discussion mo parang that only applies to art photography. That doesn't apply to art photography. Or baliktad. I mean, actually, itong photo mo to na to, this is art photography kasi yung art ko, I mean, yung photograph ko, documentary photo yan eh. Pag nilagay mo sa gallery, nagkakaroon interpretation. In fact, there's only one interpretation. Yan yung mga usapan eh. Yung mga usapan ng mga photographer. So parang in a way, sa Philippines, ayaw ng photographer na nakikriticize. And in the Philippines, pag critical ka, pag na-criticize ka, kadalasan ng thinking, negative. When in fact, the word critical doesn't necessarily mean negative. If I am critical with your work, and I said, alam mo, sobrang galing ng work mo. I am being critical with your work. And I'm saying that despite all the standards that I show to your work, it still comes out as a great photo. That is being critical and being positive. So critical and negative are not necessarily the same thing. When you are critical, then you apply a certain standard, a certain framing. And if a photo comes out of that criticism as something that is still great, then that is good. Kaya sa Pilipinas, ayaw ng mga photographer na nakikriticize. When in fact, if a critic looks at your photograph and that person says it's good, won't you be happy? Parang dito sa Pilipinas, okay maging critical basta positive. Pag critical tas medyo maraming masasabi, ayaw mo. Bakit ganun? So, diba, yun yung nature ng photography sa Philippines. Well, what can we do? I'm sure maraming critic nitong mismo itong podcast na to. Anyway, so yun yung napansin ko. So going back, so this photo is a bit poetic in the sense that it feels like we were talking about the same thing, and yet we cannot arrive at a single definition of what photography is. And at the end, we just laugh. Diba? So, okay, next. Bakit nga ba lagi na-associate ang photography sa art? Yan. So, ano yung background dun? Kasi, kadalasan, photography is taught using a certain framing. So, ano yung mga fields of study wherein photography is usually taught? So, number one is communication arts. Diba? So, that's basic. Another field is commercial arts. So, when you go to some business schools, if you are taking up advertising management or marketing management, you are taught photography. So, iba yung context as compared to communication arts. When you go to communication arts, we talk about communication theories, diba? Communicative behaviors, uh, principles and theories of how people communicate and how meaning is transferred from the source to the receiver. Yan yung mga current discussion of communication arts. So when we look at the photograph, we usually associate it with the modalities and structures of how people communicate. Yan. So, yun. But in commercial arts, photography is taught in a certain framing wherein a photograph has to sell an idea, a product, a person, a place, and the end goal is for commerce, kaya siya commercial arts. Kasi, for example, not necessarily pala. Kasi even sa commercial arts, PR, diba? So for example, one of the commercial arts, one of the subfields would be public relations. So in public relations, you are taught how to sell a person, an ideology. So yun. So yun. Okay, ano naman yung fine arts? So fine arts yan, yun yung medyo mas quote unquote artistic, diba? So yung the word fine sa fine arts, medyo ano siya loaded. So mahabang usapan yan. Pero siguro to make it simplehan natin. In a way, the tradition of uh, photography in relation to fine arts is that photography is connected. Teachers or when photography is taught under fine arts, it is assumed that it relates to the bigger field of arts. One of the critical discussions in aesthetics would be the system of legitimization. Okay. So whether it be the religious system that legitimizes arts. So traditionally, it could be the philosophical frameworks that define what is artistic. Diba? It could also mean uh, the gallery system wherein art is produced, promoted, and consumed and archived. So yun naman. And in a way, a huge tradition of fine arts comes from the Beaux Arts. Yan. So yung Beaux Arts would be the French Academy. Yan. So research nyo na lang kasi di naman to art history class. So yun. Okay. And when you go to Binil, ang term na ngayon is ang EB photography program is under the School of New Media Arts. Ano ibig sabihin nun? So I will have the dean of the School of New Media Arts on March 25. Siya na lang mag-explain. So yung episode na yon, it talks about the School of New Media. Yung episode na yun, it talks about New Media Arts. Its theory and how it is practiced. Kaya yung dean ang in-invite ko, and she was nice enough to accept the invitation. So it's better that she defines it for us. So watch out for that episode. Okay?